whistler in the woods. The city had drained them. Too much noise, too many people, too little peace. When the Peterson family found the listing for a secluded cabin deep in the woods, it felt like a dream come true. A fresh start, a simpler life. The first few days were blissful. The towering trees swayed in the wind, their rustling leaves a soothing melody. The air was crisp, untouched by the pollution they had grown so accustomed to. At night, the sky was a breathtaking expanse of stars, unobscured by city lights. They spent their evenings by the fire, telling stories and listening to the soothing hum of nature. Jack, always the early riser, enjoyed his morning coffee on the porch, marveling at how different life felt here. Laura loved the quiet, the way the world seemed to slow down. Sam and Lily explored the woods during the day, finding little trails and collecting pine cones, their laughter echoing between the trees. But then the whistling began. It started faintly, so soft they almost didn't notice it, a distant, eerie tune that floated through the night air. At first, it blended in with the natural sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves. But each night, the melody became clearer, more deliberate, as if it was calling out to them. The air around the cabin grew heavier, as though the very woods were holding their breath. It started as a faint tune, almost pleasant, barely perceptible over the night's natural symphony, an old, lilting melody carried on the wind. At first, the Petersons dismissed it as some natural phenomenon, perhaps the wind squeezing through the dense trees, or the call of some nocturnal bird. But each night, the whistle grew louder, clearer, more deliberate, and each night it seemed closer. At dinner, they would sit in uneasy silence waiting for it. When it came, Laura would clutch her fork tighter, Jack's eyes would dart to the window, and the children would push their plates away, no longer hungry. It was no longer just a sound. It was an intrusion, something alien in the quiet sanctuary they had built for themselves. One evening, as Jack stood at the sink washing dishes, the sound came again. This time, so close, it felt as if it were just beyond the cabin walls. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He turned off the faucet, straining his ears. The melody was crisp, carrying with it an odd familiarity, as if he had heard it somewhere before, but that was impossible. Wasn't it? That night, as they lay in bed, Laura whispered, "It knows we hear it." Jack didn't respond. He didn't know how to. Jack Peterson, the father, decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, he stepped outside one evening when the sound was particularly near. The forest was thick with shadows, the trees forming gnarled silhouettes under the moonlight. The wind had died completely, leaving only the sound of his own breathing and the slow, deliberate whistle echoing between the trees. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steadier than he felt. Silence. Then, a rustling. A subtle shift in the darkness, like something shifting its weight. His flashlight beam swept across the forest floor, revealing nothing but fallen leaves and twisted roots. But he felt it, a presence, watching. Yet the moment he turned back toward the cabin, the whistling stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was unnerving. as if the very forest was holding its breath. He hurried inside, locking the door behind him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved just beyond the edges of his sight. Inside, his wife Laura and their children Sam and Lily were on edge. They had started locking all the doors and windows at sunset, but the wooden walls of the cabin felt too thin, too fragile against whatever was out there. Sam, the eldest, tried to brush it off, convincing himself it was just some prankster, a trick of the wind. But Lily, the youngest, had begun to wake up in the middle of the night, crying that she had seen someone standing at the edge of the trees. Jack did his best to reassure her, but the fear in her eyes made his skin crawl. One night, he stayed up, sitting in the living room with a bat in hand, determined to catch whoever or whatever was out there. The whistling continued, persistent and unnatural. Hours passed, and just as his eyelids began to grow heavy, he heard it, a soft creak from the porch. He held his breath, listening. Then came the night when Jack woke to the sound of the front door creaking open. He sat up abruptly, heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear the whistle, louder than ever, almost as if it were inside the house. Laura stirred beside him, her eyes wide with fear. He reached for the bedside lamp, but before he could switch it on, Lily's terrified scream pierced the air. Jack and Laura bolted from the bed, racing toward their daughter's room. The hallway felt longer than usual, the shadows darker. Jack's pulse pounded as he shoved the door open. Lily was curled in the corner, shaking violently, her small hands covering her ears. She pointed to the window, her lips trembling too much to speak. Jack followed her gaze. The curtain swayed slightly, as if someone had just been there, watching. Rushing to their daughter's room, they found her curled up in the corner, pointing to the window. The curtains fluttered slightly in the night breeze. Jack's stomach turned to ice. Laura knelt beside Lily, wrapping her in a protective embrace as Jack took slow, cautious steps toward the window and peered out into the darkness. For the first time, he saw it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, tall, unnaturally still. Its face was obscured by the shadows, but Jack could make out a thin, almost elongated shape. The whistling had stopped. The air was so still it felt suffocating. It didn't move, didn't breathe. Yet Jack felt its gaze burning through him. A deep, primal fear rooted him to the spot, his body frozen as though trapped in a nightmare. Then, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, the figure tilted its head, as if acknowledging him. Jack yanked the curtain shut and turned to Laura. "We're leaving. Now." Laura nodded wordlessly, her face pale. Sam clutched Lily's hand, his own knuckles white with tension. The air inside the cabin had changed. Oppressive, thick, charged with something unseen. As Jack reached for his car keys, the whistling started again. Not from outside, but from inside the house. They gathered their things in record time, throwing essentials into bags with shaking hands. The car's headlights cut through the darkness as they sped down the dirt road, away from the cursed cabin. As they drove, Lily clung to Laura, sobbing. "It was in my room," she whispered. "It was watching me." Jack didn't look back. He didn't need to. The whistling had started again, and this time, it was following them. Miles down the road, the car's engine sputtered. Jack cursed under his breath, pulling over. The forest stretched out on either side, an unbroken sea of blackness. He gripped the wheel, pulse hammering. "Stay in the car," he ordered. Stepping out, the night air was thick, suffocating. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint clicking of the cooling engine. He popped the hood, shining his flashlight into the tangled mess of wires and metal, but his hands were shaking too badly to focus. Then, from the trees, the whistling resumed, closer than ever before. Jack's breath hitched. He turned, slowly, flashlight beams sweeping the darkness. The trees swayed gently, whispering secrets to one another. A shadow shifted between them, too tall, too still. The tune was clearer now, deliberate, as if it was meant just for him. A sharp knock against the passenger window made Laura scream. Jack spun, heart leaping into his throat. Sam fumbled for the door lock as Lily buried her face in Laura's shoulder, sobbing. The glass fogged slightly, as if something had exhaled against it. The whistling was right outside the car,